before we do this. It's kind of like a ritual now. We've been doing it for 3 months, and we're going to continue doing this now since people like it. I give like a little speech beforehand, then we'll pass it off onto our action items, and we'll go straight to our speakers. And I don't really prepare the speech, but this idea just came to me because I was talking with somebody 20 minutes before this all started up. And the reason why I started doing meetups was because of a question, and the meetup was the answer to that question. And the question was, I was going to meetups and asking, how do you find that first job in tech? Like, what do you do? Who do you talk to? Like, what is the thing to do? And every time I talked and asked that question, I heard the exact same answer over and over and over again. It's, oh man, that first job, that's the hardest thing to find. Oh, it's so hard. It's like climbing a mountain is so hard. But if you find the first one, the rest after that, like it's just coming easier and easier and easier and easier. But that first one, woo, that's rough. That is like the worst answer in the world to me because number one, you haven't even motivated me at this point. You've demotivated me. You've made me not happy in what the field that I'm choosing to be in. And you haven't even given me any action items on do this, this, and this. Then you'll have a chance. Or go talk to so-and-so, and now you have a better opportunity. So I realized very quickly a lot of new learners and beginner learners were getting discouraged in this process because they had no clue where to go. So I had to fix this very quickly. So what I did was I started getting involved in meetups, and my goal was to get professional developers alongside beginner developers and let these two worlds, you know, kind of combine together, so to speak. And in doing so, we were able to create this amazing group that we have now. We kept growing and growing and growing. And the best thing about that, and this is a stat that I'm extremely proud of. Last year, I helped 44 people land their first jobs in tech. I am proud of that number because it proves that the demand is there. The jobs are there, but they want the skills. No one said this was easy. We just said it was possible. There's jobs. There was a job I wanted. It's not all happy stories. There was a job I wanted. I wanted it bad. They didn't take me. It was the best thing that never happened because it led me to my current company, a company that supports everything I do with the community. It supports learning resources. It supports me, you know, doing these meetups. Not every company would be so happy about the fact that I'm in the public eye because I could possibly mess up and make them look bad. This company was all for it. And for that, I'm extremely happy. And it just teaches me, like, don't worry about the loss because the win is right around the corner. You just got to be patient. You got to be ready for it. So what is it that will make this all worth it for you? Like, to face rejections, to brainstorm and don't feel intimidated, to say, I can do this. What is it that'll make it worth it for you to raise the bar and say to yourself, I've got some more stuff in me? What is it that will make you become feeling empowered and challenged? What is it that'll make it worth it for you to want to give up? And when things are working against you, like you're applying to jobs and it's not coming back, what is it that will help you get back up again when it's too hard? If that it is your reason for why and wanting to expand your knowledge and become a developer, I think that is amazing and you can do it. I'm living proof. I have no degree. I have no formal education background, but if you put in the work and you put in the passion and you're serious about it, you can absolutely reach point X, Y, Z. Keep your passion alive. Keep working towards your goal. I'm a big believer in the definition of decision, which comes from the Latin word of incision, which means to cut off any other possibility. No other option should deter you, distract you, or pull you away from your goal, because if you're giving it your all, and if you're thinking about something committedly, you will absolutely get that goal. Keep studying, keep working, and the main reason why is it is better for you right now to be prepared and not have an opportunity than to have an opportunity and not be prepared, because you will blow it and there'll be no recovering from it at that point. I say this wholeheartedly because I'm personally invested in every single one of you guys. Through one way or another, the reason why you found out about this meetup is because either you've talked, you've seen my message, you've seen something for us to be able to communicate with each other. I will do anything I have in my power to make sure I'm doing right by you. You just need to let me know. With that said, thank you for listening to my little spiel. I hope it motivated, inspired, and helped somebody out there. Without further ado, if Quincy Larson is available, I will give the floor now to Mr. Quincy Larson. Thank you guys, and I appreciate all of you.
Everyone, I'm Quincy. First of all, I just want to thank Danny for inviting me. That speech he gave at the beginning, uh, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add from a motivational standpoint. I mean, he nailed it. The people who are going to be getting jobs right now are the people who are out there applying. Um, there's a non-zero probability, even in the worst recession in modern history, a global recession, coupled with a pandemic. Even in these circumstances, I just did a Google search, or I'm sorry, a search on Indeed.com, and we just published this course on the AWS Developer Associate certification. It's like a 16-hour course. It's really comprehensive, and it'll teach you pretty much everything you need to know to pass the exam if you take notes and if you practice with some of the tools and everything. There are more than 1,000 jobs open right now in the U.S. that just mention this, even in, as I said, the biggest recession in modern history. So the opportunities are out there. So I really appreciate Danny inviting me. I'm honored and probably upstaged by C Dodds. His course is, I haven't personally taken it, but I've heard phenomenal things. A whole lot of people in the Free Code Camp community have taken it. So I would strongly encourage you to check it out. And I just want to thank him for making that course free. It takes a lot of time and energy to design thoughtful, pedagogically sound instructional design like he has. And it's great that he's making some of that stuff free. And, he's constantly sharing his insights and his expertise. So definitely, if you're not following him on Twitter, I strongly recommend it. So if everybody who can turn on your cameras, I don't want to pressure you, but I just want to be able to get a little bit of first of all, this is the biggest Zoom call I've been in. It's pretty cool having this nice grid view. Like the other tools I've used haven't had, the ability to have this many. We've used like Crowdcast, which, for Skype, which is what we're using for our upcoming conference. And I hope you all will attend that. It's free. You can just hang out and watch the whole thing. If you can't make it, no problem. You can watch it asynchronously after the fact. We are having it really early in the morning. So I think it'll start it won't start as on the East Coast. It'll start a little bit more reasonably. It starts at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. So we put this together very quickly, and we're very excited to be discussing 4 big topics. And those topics are, if I have over here, the topics we're going to be discussing are, and I figured instead of sharing my screen and trying to do a slide deck and everything, I just talk. I hope you all don't mind a more freewheeling approach, because really what I want to do is I want to answer as many questions as possible. So the 4 things we're going to have 4 panels, each with 3 developers from around the world, and then me and Fazil, the co-founder of Hashnode. We're both going to be kind of co-emceeing, but we're going to talk about how to learn new skills while you're social distancing, how to work from home productively and stay sane. Because, people can work productively from home, but can they do it sustainably, right? Especially with the kids at home and all that stuff. And we're going to hear from people who've managed to do that. How to find companies who are still hiring and apply for developer jobs, and how to land freelance work during the pandemic. And as you're going to see if you listen to that panel, there are a lot of opportunities to be had. There are a lot of organizations that need to very quickly move things online. Churches, mosques, any sort of school that has an aging system. I was just reading about, and I just tweeted about it less than an hour ago, this huge shortage of COBOL developers. I don't even know how it's pronounced. It hasn't been taught in universities since the 1980s. And yet we have a whole bunch of mission critical systems that rely on it. Every credit card swipe or a ATM swipe, about 95% of those swipes ultimately hit servers or APIs that are running on COBOL. So COBOL. So I'm not saying go out and learn COBOL. I don't think that that's the right answer, but I'm saying that these systems will absolutely need to be modernized. And so what this has done is it's just imagine like all of society had this night. It's a beach, and then the water goes out, and suddenly you see all the problems that were just kind of hidden under the surface of the water. And now that so many of those problems are in sight, we can start to work on them. And we can start to prioritize them as a society instead of just saying, oh, but nobody really cares about how this particular system works. Well, when you don't have any developers who are alive and still working, who know how to use the software that powers the system, it's a problem, and that problem can become pretty serious. Some of these COBOL jobs I was finding on Indeed were paying like $700 a day, $800 a day. I mean, imagine that. Like bringing in some developer from retirement and telling them, here's $700 a day. Please look at our legacy system and figure out how to fix it. And imagine you're like a local government or something like that, right? So there's gonna be a trauma associated with this specific aspect of the catastrophe we're all going through. And just to be 100% clear, I don't want to trivialize anything that we're going through. This is all terrible. You and I, and probably everybody on this Zoom, we're over the next year probably going to lose somebody whom we love to this virus. And we are probably, there's probably a good chance that we ourselves are going to get it at some point. I'm not trying to scare you, but it's spreading very rapidly, and it's very hard to contain. So I'm not going to give any medical advice or anything like that. I'm just going to say this is serious, but if we take as a granted that this is a very serious situation, and we step back and we say, I'm powerless over the spread of COVID-19. I personally can stay home. I can take precautions. I can wash my hands. I can encourage my parents who may not take it as seriously to also stay home and also wash their hands. I can wear some sort of facial covering out in public to reduce the likelihood of getting it. I can homeschool my kids for the next year and a half to reduce the likelihood. I can, basically liquidate any assets I have so that I'll be able to afford to continue to stay home to reduce the likelihood of getting, like, everybody's going to have to make different sacrifices. And some of us are in positions to make more sacrifices than others. A lot of people will have to go out and work. But I'm optimistic that some people will be able to transition their skill set and be able to successfully go out there and find opportunities where they can work from home, and they can provide for their families, and they can also stay safe until we have universal vaccination against this, which will hopefully happen within the next 12 to 18 months. So I'm monitoring this very closely, but what I want all of us to think about is the opportunities here. What can we potentially do today to come out of this stronger as a result? What can our communities potentially do today to come out of this stronger? There are going to be all kinds of opportunities to make the world more robust. And so learning to code and learning these new skills is going to be a big step toward that. The sun is setting and it's getting darker over here. Let me move over to here so you can see me a little bit better. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say in terms of just like stay hopeful. A lot of this is completely out of your control. It's a global pandemic. Even like national governments can't control it at this point. Some are doing better than others, frankly. But, we just have to have, we have to ask for the serenity to accept that we can't change this. But there are things that we can change. And that is how we react. Like whether we cut our significant other whom we're in close proximity to all day long slack and try not to let tempers flare. Whether we have the energy to get up in the morning and learn some new skills, or apply for jobs or try to track down freelance clients, build a new project. Those things we do have some degree of control over. So that's what I encourage you all to focus on. The remedy for despair is action. And I encourage you all to take as much action and to know that, this is chaos and nobody has all the answers. Nobody has everything figured out. Nobody's necessarily coming to magically save us. We have to take action ourselves. And, the people here in this community, GDG Memphis, and within larger developer communities, we can help one another. There is, there may be a scarcity of food and toilet paper and other things that people are hoarding, and supply chains are breaking down temporarily. They'll get back online. Those may be in short supply, but what is not in short supply is friendliness and patience and generosity and our ability to help one another overcome different setbacks we're facing that, maybe it's just I screwed up my developer environment and I can't figure out how to get my C libraries in order so that I can run this code. Or people asking hey, I really need to learn COBOL for my job. Does anybody have any good resources on that? Just helping one another where we can. This is a great opportunity to add everybody you've ever talked to on LinkedIn. This is a great opportunity to learn new skills, to go back and improve your resume. This can be an incubation period for the inevitable return to relative normalcy that we'll eventually experience. So I just want to encourage you all, put in the work today so that, over the longer period, you're better off. So I'm going to ask a few questions. If you have your cameras on, I can see your hands come up. I just want to get a feel for who else is in the audience, and you don't have to answer or anything. But I just want to ask, since how many of you all have worked as a developer before? And if you could hold your hands up for just a minute, I have to scroll through to count because Zoom will only show 25 boxes at a time. Okay, so 1, 2. Okay, good. Yeah, I see Ken has 2 hands, which I think he's held many jobs over the years. Okay, great. So pretty much probably at least half of you. How many of you all have had some significant economic life change in the form of getting furloughed or getting your hours dramatically reduced or getting laid off completely over the past, few months? Okay, so, right. Yeah, quite a few people. So how many of you would say that you could, with your current skills, go out and find a new job in the near future if you were to just sit down and apply like a maniac to every open job? Okay. That's great. And that's really reassuring. I'm glad to hear that a lot of actually being able to accomplish this is believing that you can accomplish it. There's that old quote, whether you believe you can do it or you can't do it, you are correct. I think it's a Henry Ford quote, but I don't want to misattribute things. So at this point, I'd like to just answer any questions you all have. So if you're just joining or if you have no idea who this guy is, I'm Quincy Larson. I'm the teacher at FreeCodeCamp. I started FreeCodeCamp in 2014. I learned to code at age 31. I had never, my wife would help me configure the Wi-Fi router every time we moved. I just didn't have the patience for it. And I think it wasn't an aptitude thing. It wasn't I just didn't have the patience to sit down and read documentation, figure out how to learn new things. And the thing that changed was seeing how much learning to code could do in terms of I was a school director and a teacher, and I just learned how to dramatically improve the productivity of my staff, all my teachers and my admins, by learning some very basic programming and automating a few really tedious things that the staff were having to do regularly. And that was what really opened my eyes to it, and then led me to ultimately learn to code and become a software engineer. Now, technically, I'm in Texas. I can't claim I'm a software engineer because in Texas, you have to have a 4-year engineering degree to call yourself an engineer. So a developer. While I'm in Texas, I'm just a developer. Yeah, so that's a little background about me. Any questions you all have about Free Code Camp, about your own coding journeys, about finding opportunities, creating projects of your own, finding freelance work, I will answer to the best of my ability. And then I'm almost certain that if you attend the conference on Tuesday, you'll get much more comprehensive answers from people who are much more learned on the topics than I am. But I'm going to take a crack at it. Questions?
How long did it take you to become very fluent in this?
Well, I would say I'm still pretty mediocre. What you're looking at is a person who's largely just gotten lucky and been in the right place at the right time. But I would say the first year of me coding, like I've written about it a few places and done some podcast interviews if you want to listen to those for a more comprehensive answer. But probably within the first 9 months of using desktop Linux and using lots of online courses and reading lots of programming books and things like that, and just every single day. And at this point, like this was back before I feel like it was harder to learn while you were continuing to work. I mean, it still is harder to learn while you're working, but it's much more realistic that you could successfully transition into software development while you were working your normal full-time job doing whatever it is you're doing. Assuming you're able to work like a normal 40 hours a week, and you're not like, if you're juggling kids and working overtime and doing all these other things, then it can become increasingly inviable that you'll be able to transition. But people do it in like a couple of years. Sometimes I'll see people who got a job after 3 or 4 years of learning to code part-time. So just because I was able to do it full-time and learn in 9 months and get my first developer job, which, by the way, getting your first developer job is really just the beginning. Once you're working on a team with other people, that's when the real learning starts. And that's where you have additional pressure to perform and you rise to the occasion. And you have extrinsic motivation, not just yourself sitting at your coffee table thinking like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pump myself up and I'm going to do this. No, you have to do it because it's your job. So that really accelerates things. So yeah, long answer, but it took me about 9 months.
Mr. Lockhart has a question. Can we have him ask his question, please?
Thanks, Danny. You're a good game show host. Quincy, thank you for coming here. This is amazing. You are very much a celebrity in my eyes. I can't express how much. My question is this. There's a number of people in the group here tonight who have made some sort of a commitment to help others, whether it's online, meetup groups, what have you. One of the most impressive things about Free Code Camp to me is the reach, just how many people you've been able to touch with that platform. Can you share any tips, things that you've learned in terms of scaling help?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would describe my primary job as volunteer management. Volunteer management is significantly harder than managing normal teams. And I'm coming with the benefit of having worked as a traditional manager and managed, schools like up to, I think maybe like I maxed that out around 25, 30 people that directly reported to me or reported to people who reported to me. So not like super high in an organizational chart, but that was relatively easy because there was like this kind of implied circumstance where like you kind of have to do what I say because I outrank you and your livelihood is tied to you being able to continue to work in this job. So that is relatively easy. So if anybody tells you volunteer management isn't that hard, maybe they're just a natural for it. Maybe they have like, natural charisma or something that helps people get them to, the people just do what they ask. But I think it's significantly harder to manage volunteers. So my immediate suggestion would be, and I don't know a whole lot about what exactly you're trying to accomplish, like the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. But the first step, in my opinion, is always figuring out who wants to do what. and then letting them do that, like matchmaking people's ambitions with opportunities for them to actually help. And if you can find people who really want to, for example, they really want to work on like the user experience design of an app, or they really want to work on the product management aspect, or they really want to just work on, making sure the scheme is as efficient as possible or something like that. I don't know. Whatever it is that they're really interested in, seeing if you can find a piece of work for them to set their sights on. That is the most powerful thing. And you can just ask them. Like there are like all sorts of ways for trying to guess, but the simplest thing is just ask people what they want to do. And then in terms of sustainability, you always want to know how much time they have. And you can just ask an open-ended question like, hey, about how many hours a week do you think you could help out with this? Or not even hours, but hours I find is good, because hours a week, that could just be them sitting down once a week, like on a Saturday night, and instead of, playing video games or something, they are jumping in and catching up on GitHub notifications and responding to GitHub issues, or checking in some code. So yeah, that would be my main thing, is figure out what people want to do, and the best way to do that is just to ask them. It sounds really simple and intuitive, but it did take me a long time to figure that out.
Thank you so much for that.
All right, we have time for one more question before we need to go on to Kent. Does anybody have one last question?
Yeah, I had a question, Oriana.
Go ahead.
So the question is, with Free Code Camp, there's so many different programs on there, and that you can decide to go immerse yourself and learn into it. So for someone who is new to development, can you talk a little bit about kind of that approach? Because like for me, I'm a developer for a little bit over 2 years, and I just remember as I was learning, I was always being told new technology to kind of dabble in or get some experience in. And so that's always been a challenge for me to know kind of what to focus on, especially when it comes to like learning, whether that is React or Angular or Postgres or MongoDB or the command line. So I guess my question for you is just kind of, can you some guidance on that for someone who was new, who was also hearing about all these different really cool technologies to be a part of, about kind of how they can decipher through that and kind of decide which ones they should be focusing on now versus let's look at that in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my daughter kind of walked in and was like asking me to play video games with her. We're playing through Breath of the Wild and trying to find all the shrines. So she, I'm sorry, not to talk about my daughter, but your question, just to be clear, I understand, is basically how do you narrow the scope and focus on what you should learn and what the highest priority thing should.
Correct.
Because I mean, given an infinite amount of time, you'd want to learn everything, but you don't have any. So my answer to this would just be to really focus on the fundamentals. The fundamentals don't really change. Like fundamental computer science has been intact more or less. Like a lot of the algorithms we use and the data structures and things like that have been intact since like the 50s and the 60s, really, 70s. The mathematics that underlies a lot of like security and math is old. Like linear algebra is really useful, for example, in data science, and I think that's existed for hundreds of years. So I would recommend, instead of focusing on specific newfangled tools, if you just focus on continuing to expand your knowledge of fundamentals, you'll be in a great position to just pick up new tools. I always tell people, just learn one language really, really well before you try to learn a second one. Just learn one front-end framework really well before you try to learn a second one. Just learn one database really well before you learn a second one. You're using like an ORM or something, you can, in theory, swap out the databases. But I strongly, and Free Code Camp's curriculum strongly emphasize just learning foundational skills
Okay.
that you can port to whatever the job requires. And so my humble advice on this would be train yourself to be a generalist. And then when you get a job, specialize as your employer requires you to.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
We have one last question from Walker, and the reason why I'm letting him ask this as well is because when you DM'd me, I fangirled a little bit, and he made sure that it was really happening. I wasn't dreaming about it. So go ahead, Walker, ask that question.
Just a quick question. In your experience, you're self-taught. You learned programming at a later age in life, but how did you stay productive and make the most out of your practice, your training, rather than just going another tutorial or another course or another, I found this rabbit hole, going to go down it. Now I'm going to switch.
Yeah.
I've run into that.
I did that a ton when I was first learning the code, and I've written about it. I wrote this article. It was actually like the first big article that Free Code Camp published that like blew up on like Hacker News and Reddit and stuff. It was called A Cautionary Tale of Learning to Code, my own, if you want to Google it. And basically, I made those exact mistakes when I was learning to code. Like my friends would be like, "Oh, you got to learn Emacs. Why are you using Vim?" And then oh, why are you coding in Ruby? You should be using Python. Python's the future, not Ruby. And just constantly switching back and forth between different tools, and it really blunts your ability to really go deep on any one tool. So that's why I encourage people. I mean, Free Code Camp only has one curriculum. Like it's a single linear curriculum. There are no electives. There's no forks in the road where you have to make an uneducated decision about like, oh, should I go this way or should I go this way? We try to take all the guesswork out of it. And that is informed by my own experience, just jumping from resource to resource and using a whole bunch of different, Coursera and edX courses and using a whole bunch of different books and like basically learning the same fundamental stuff over and over and over to, at a very basic level. Like, okay, here's another string. Okay, now I know how to do strings in Ruby and JavaScript and Python. How can I move on to, something useful, right? Like something that is more substantial. So yeah, my humble advice is just go really deep on a specific set of tools and get really confident with that. Build a complicated project that hopefully, ideally you can get people to use, whether it's just, some sort of like donor management tool for like a local food bank or something like that. But get people actually using it and maintain it. And you're going to get to use all kinds of different programming concepts and programming tools, just building and maintaining that relatively large, complicated application and then fulfilling feature requests and things like that. So it's much better to build a single ambitious project than it is to have like a huge portfolio of little projects. And granted, little projects are great for learning as well. And the new Free Code Camp curriculum is going to involve more than 100 projects because everything's a project. It's like fully project-oriented learning. But those are just kind of toy projects. Those are not meant to help you get a job. They're meant to give you tons of practice actually coding and implementing systems. So yeah, finding a single big project and just keeping a single stack and committing to it and sticking with it, that's the way to really go deep on a specific set of tools and actually progress. And once you have that, you'll be able to easily pick up a new one. Like if you learn how to do that with like the JavaScript stack, going and learning like iOS development or learning .NET development will be a cakewalk because those are much more developer-friendly experiences. It's not the Wild West like JavaScript is, right? JavaScript is becoming less the Wild West. But yeah, I hope that's kind of a long, convoluted answer, but choose some things, stick with them. Don't question those decisions. Just keep working with it, and then later you can pick up additional things.
To kind of piggyback off that, I just want to add, I have 3 rules that I give to everybody over and over again because I get the same messages almost every day now. And it's the 3 rules to become a developer fast. It's ABL, ABB, and CCC. Always be learning, always be building, Code, code, code. There's no shortcut to success in this situation. ABL, you should always be learning through whatever means, mediums, and options you have. ABB, always be building, because nothing in a tutorial breaks, and in life, everything breaks. Even if you're trying to do simple background red, why isn't the background changing red? It's the simplest CSS thing, but it will break. And code, 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 because cool, you want to learn how to code? Code. You want to learn how to be a programmer? Code. You want to be a software developer? Code. It's the exact same answer every single time at practice. Also, Quincy, are you in Texas? Is that where you said you live?
Yeah. I moved from San Francisco to Texas, and it's way chiller here.
Yeah, it is. I love the South.
Literally colder, but it's
Yeah.
And I grew up in Oklahoma City, so
I want to throw this out there because you said this a couple times. Like, how many of you all? You're in the South now, baby. You could throw a y'all in there. It's all right. But I'm hoping that there's a way we can eventually get you to come over here to Memphis, because I for one will help you get fat eating barbecue, because we've got it, and I think ours beats yours a little bit. We'll see though. But
all right.
I definitely want to get you over here for sure.
Thank you so much for having me on this event. And if I can make it, like, I would love nothing more than when my kids are like slightly older and less needy, to just drive. Cause I haven't really been in that part of the US at all. Like, I barely.
It's time we change that.
So yeah.
Yeah, definitely come out, because even if I have to kidnap people and bring them to the talk, I'll make sure that building is packed. Don't worry about that. We'll get them there. But I do want to start moving this over towards Kent, because we're a little behind schedule. But I would love to do another event with you. Just if you want to do something, we can talk and just make a whole conversation out of this as well, because I think we can hit a lot of subjects. Because there's some questions I have, but I could save it for another time. We could do a whole event out of it.
Well, hey, thank you, everybody. I just want to thank you and wish you all well. I hope you and your family stay safe during the pandemic. And I hope you all keep learning and keep coming to these events that Danny and his colleagues are putting on. And I'm gonna mute, and I'm gonna turn off my video, and I'm still gonna be here. I want to check out what Kent has to say. But cheers, everybody. Happy coding.
Thank you for everything you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Quincy.
See, what Quincy doesn't know is that I just recorded that, and that is going to be my new commercial, because that is awesome. But just to lay the groundwork here, Kent is a personal hero of mine. He's taught me so much about React. He is an authority on React. I've heard there are murals of him in certain African villages somewhere. The guy, no, kidding. But he really is phenomenal beyond belief. If you don't follow him on Twitter, make that a thing to do, because he does put out some great information. I can tell you, I attended a few live streams he was doing, recording this content for his course, and the man really does put in a lot of effort, to where he was noticing a blinking cursor and was like, oh, this is going to throw me off in editing. That is how dedicated he is to make sure he's putting out resources that are valuable and that are bringing value to the people learning them. That is the main reason why I talk so highly of him, because even if you learn one thing, you're learning one thing and it's going to stick with you. Retention matters more than speeding through something. So even if a course is only 10 hours, those 10 hours, if you're retaining, are more valuable than the 40-hour course that you're just skimming through. Stick with it. Trust the process. Thank you very much, Kent C Dodds.
Oh, thank you, Danny. Yeah, those things that you said are really important to me. Retention is huge for me. I spend a silly amount of time focused on how can I help people retain the stuff I'm teaching. So thank you. With just the little bit of time that we have here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have some slides. And based on the questions that we got in Quincy's talk, which, by the way, Quincy, awesome to actually see you in real time for the first time. That's kind of fun to connect in this virtual way. But based on the questions that Quincy got, I think this will be very relevant for a lot of you. And that is how to react. And I just realized I need to pull up the chat over here so I can have that. I'm not super great at seeing the chats as they come in, but I'll try to see things as they come in. Yeah, so React is a framework for JavaScript, and it is by far the most popular way to build modern web applications today. Maybe not the most popular or the most widely used in production today. I'm not sure about that number, but for applications that are being built and developed actively today, React is the framework of choice for sure. And so it's really a big subject, and so that's why I have this talk on like how do we go about starting from zero knowledge to React to total knowledge of React. And I'm not going to give you that total knowledge in the 20 or 30 minutes that I'm going to be talking, but I'm going to give you the groundwork or the path that you can follow so that you can develop that that knowledge. So yeah, just a few things about me here at the start. I live in Utah. I work for myself. I make educational content for anybody for web development. And I've created testingjavascript.com. If you want to learn about how to test JavaScript and how testing frameworks work and all of that stuff, pretty much everything I know about testing, I've put on testingjavascript.com, and it's not a little. And I'm the author of the testing library that has been adopted by the React ecosystem. And so, yeah, I know a thing or two about testing, and I can teach you all about that at testingjavascript.com. And I'm doing the same thing for React. So this little logo right up here, that's the Epic React logo. You can find out more about Epic React at epicreact.dev. And this is currently underway. I just did a Twitter thread explaining kind of what the scope of Epic React is. And it's enormous. It's going to be so big. So lots and lots of stuff. When I tell people, or when people ask me, how do I learn React, I will point them to epicreact.dev. With only a little bit of JavaScript knowledge, you can move on to Epic React and learn everything I know about React, which is also not a little. You can find or you can find my slides right here. Everything in here is linked. So I'll just go ahead and paste this in our chat. Oh my goodness, I just copied like the whole slide. But there we go. I don't think I can edit that chat, but it's that last thing at the very end there is a link. There we go. Let's get it something that's clickable. My goodness. Here, let's do this. How to React slides. There we go. Something clickable. So you can go take a look at these and click on these links to anything that's interesting to you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about abstractions. React is an abstraction, so just get us all on the same page of what we're talking about when we talk or when we say abstraction. And I'm going to give you some fundamental principles of more like what you should be focusing on when you're learning something new in general, but in specifics for React. So let's talk about abstraction really quick. If you've heard of jQuery before, or if you haven't heard of jQuery before, it is this wildly popular library that was released many years ago for the web, where during a time when browsers were implemented in very different ways. And so you would interact with the browser very differently. And so you had to write a lot of code to interact with the browser so that your code works across different browsers because they worked differently. And so this is just an example of some code that you could write that would implement one of the features of jQuery, which was to toggle a class name on a DOM node, on an element. And so if the browser supported classless, then you could just call the toggle method on it. Otherwise, you had to do a whole bunch of other stuff for that same functionality to work. So this was all hidden inside of jQuery, and it made doing toggling class names really easy because you just had one line of code that you needed to write rather than a whole function of code. And so jQuery is an abstraction. It separates you from the complexities of dealing with the browser. So when you're using an abstraction like jQuery or React or Vue or literally anything that separates you from the layer below you, from interacting with the DOM directly or from interacting with a file system if you're writing a node or some server-side thing. Anytime you're using this abstraction, you need to ask yourself two questions, and that is, what is the benefit of the abstraction and what is the cost of the abstraction? And for you to be able to know the answer to both of those questions, you have to understand what the abstraction is doing, and understand whether what that abstraction is doing is what you actually need. So if we're running in modern browsers, then it turns out that all modern browsers support class list. So if you were using jQuery just for the toggle functionality, it turns out that you have a bunch of code that the abstraction is doing for you that you actually don't really need. In modern browsers, and like if all you are doing is supporting modern browsers, then all you really need is this one line of code for toggling a class name on your element. And so without understanding the abstraction that you are using, you're actually shipping a bunch of extra code to users. There's more opportunity for bugs to fall in here. And so when you don't understand the abstraction, you could be paying costs that you don't actually need to, because you don't actually reap any benefit from the abstraction. So costs like performance, maybe it's a little bit slower to use this thing, the time investment of learning those APIs, maintainability. So if there's an update in the abstraction, now you have to go and get the updated version of that library, learn what the breaking changes were, and adapt your code to match those breaking changes. And yeah, if the tool that you are using is abandoned, now you own that entire abstraction and you're responsible for keeping it up to date for security or whatever else new optimizations that need to be made. And so all of this just kind of results in it's fine. Like these are costs that you're willing to pay for the benefit of the abstraction, what it does for you. But if it's not actually doing anything useful for you, then you're paying these costs for no reason. And so it's really important to, or it can really help you be more effective at using these abstractions like jQuery or React or Vue or whatever, if you understand a little bit better how they work. And so with that kind of framework around our understanding of abstraction, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can learn React the most effectively that you can. Before I get into that, I just want to say, if you're just here to play around and you're like, I need to ship something quick, then that's totally fine. You do not have to just focus on fundamentals today and before you can actually ship anything. In fact, I think that it's, especially when you're just trying to get a job, it's totally acceptable to find the job that you're really wanting, and then do whatever, like learn whatever it takes for that specific job. So if they're doing React, go learn React. You can skip over the fundamentals and pick those up later so you can land that job. If you're not totally sure, then the fundamentals are a great way for you to solidify your understanding and accelerate your understanding of the frameworks that you're going to be using potentially in the real job market. Especially if you're not sure what framework you want to learn or what framework you want to work with when you do get that job. So all that I'm saying is that learning React in this way, kind of a methodical fundamentals first way, is a really great way to up your skills and improve your understanding and improve your ability to use the abstraction more effectively. So with that, how do we get started with React? You start with JavaScript. React is written in JavaScript. It is kind of an abstraction on top of JavaScript and on top of the DOM, on top of working with the browser. So starting with JavaScript makes total sense, and JavaScript is, as far as learning new programming languages, it's a really great place to start learning programming languages, because it's very friendly relative to other programming languages. And so a couple of resources for learning JavaScript. I have a blog post called JavaScript to Know for React, and I'll just pop that open here really quick. So when you see that, you know you're on that blog post. But I just list out a bunch of the features of modern JavaScript that I use all the time when I'm using React. And so you can go take a look at that. And if there's a feature that you're like, oh, I'm not sure I understand what this code block is doing, then you can go research it and play around with it a little bit more to solidify your knowledge there. And I don't list everything that JavaScript can do in here, but this can give you a good kind of idea of what types of things you could be learning when we're learning JavaScript. Another thing is JavaScript30.com by my friend Wes Boss. He is a phenomenal teacher. People love the stuff that he teaches. And JavaScript 30 is 30 projects, little projects that Wes has created for you to build that'll teach you vanilla JavaScript and working with browser APIs. And it's all very it's pretty practical stuff and really applicable for the types of stuff that you're going to be building. And it's all self-paced as well. So you build all kinds of stuff. It's really quite fun. Definitely recommend pulling this out. And it is free 99. So yeah, what do you do about that? So yeah, JavaScript 30 is another really awesome resource to solidify your understanding of JavaScript and browser APIs. And all of these browser APIs are what React is using under the hood. So understanding these things will help you understand React a lot better as well. And then there's modern JavaScript APIs. And I have a workshop that I gave when I was working at PayPal that is still totally relevant today. All of the materials are open source and available for watching. And it's a 2-day workshop on YouTube that's totally free for you to work through with me. And so if that's something that you want to solidify your understanding of the latest features of JavaScript, then this is a really awesome resource for you as well. So yeah, with that, now that we have a good understanding of JavaScript, let's learn React. So here are the things that I suggest you focus on as you get started learning React, or some resources for you to do so. So it was mentioned earlier, the Beginner's Guide to React. This I created this over 2 years ago, and it was just recently updated like 2 weeks ago to use the latest features of React. And in fact, it's twice as much content as there was the first time. So if you've watched this before, I strongly advise that you watch it again because it's a lot of really high value to minute content. So I'm not in the business of wasting people's time. And so I try to make it as dense and focused as possible. And if I get one more person to complete it, apparently I'll be at 5,555 people completed. So that'd be great. But yeah, so there's tons of stuff in here that is all totally free. It only costs you your time. And I think it's a super great use of your time. So as you're getting started learning React, I can't think of a better resource for you than the Beginner's Guide to React. So definitely give that a look, a really solid look. So another, and part of the Beginner's Guide to React, one of the things that I really think is important is the ability for you to draw lines around abstractions, to put React and put it in a little box, and this is React, and here's JavaScript, and here's my building tool, and here's all of these things. And lots of courses that I see online are they teach them all together. And it muddies the water a lot. And you don't know what's React and what's React DOM and what's React Native and what's Webpack and what's Parcel and what's all of these different things. And so in the course, I teach you using index HTML files. So if you've ever written an HTML file before, and if you haven't, that's great because it's really easy or straightforward to do that. You save a text file with .html and boom, you've done it. And you open it up in a browser. And so we start from a blank HTML file and build out this little, a couple examples using React. And so you are able to draw lines around, okay, what is React? What is React DOM? What's the browser APIs? And what is the Babel compiler thing doing so that I can use this fancy syntax? And how does that all work? You learn a lot of that from the course. I think that's really important. And I encourage you to spend some time getting some understanding of what part of what you're doing is coming from what abstraction you're using, because you absolutely will be using many abstractions to build web applications. There's also codesandbox.io, which is awesome. Take a look at this. We can I can even edit this live because this is an iframe, so I can say, "Hi, I don't know, folks, you are great," and it's amazing. Code Sandbox is fantastic, and I definitely encourage you to spend some time in Code Sandbox. After you jump out of that index HTML where, okay, now I understand all the lines, you can jump into Code Sandbox and start using multiple files. You can import modules and all sorts of things. And then outside of Code Sandbox, you can actually click this button and download the Code Sandbox, open it up locally, and now you can install dependencies and get everything installed. And you can ship it to Netlify, have it on the World Wide Web to show to your family and friends, and it's just awesome. So I see this as the great progression for learning React and being able to draw lines around each tool as you add those tools in, rather than just like jumping in with all of the tools all at once, where I don't think you'll find as much success doing that. So once you have this, then you can start talking about dependencies and NPM. So like, don't just like reach for Redux and React Router and whatever before you even jump into, or before you understand React, because that muddies the waters and you're like, wait, isn't Redux like a part of React or something? Like you don't, if you do it all at once, then it's harder to draw those lines around these abstractions. But once you have an understanding of what React does and what React DOM does, then you can start bringing in other tools and other abstractions to solve the problems that you find yourself facing. And so, like there are a bajillion of these tools that you can find on NPM. And I did this search like 2 years ago. This screenshot is quite old. I'm sure we have way more packages on NPM that are React related today. So lots and lots of opportunity to explore, plenty of abstractions. And yeah, definitely a fun thing to do. And using NPM, I just have this quick little demo of that. We have a package JSON in here that has some dependencies. And we can run npm install, and it installs those dependencies. And so getting an understanding of how to use NPM to install dependencies would be a great next step. And Igor just searched, and it looks like there were more than twice as many packages as was in my screenshot. So that's fun. And then also, as you're using third-party packages, you're going to start to need to use modules. And I have a video, it's a talk that's titled More Than You Want to Know About ES6 Modules. So you can go learn like a lot, like I said, more than you want to know about it, and all the different syntax features for ES modules. So you can take a look at that as a pretty good resource to learn that. And then we can jump into building an actual app that has routing and the URL, it's URL aware. And so React Router is the de facto standard. It is super great. So definitely give React Router a solid look. And to understand that abstraction, Tyler McGinnis created a blog post tutorial thing to build your own React Router, so you get an understanding of how React Router works. It is an old version of React Router, but the principles upon which that blog post is built are still relevant today. And so you'll learn a lot by going through this thing. And I encourage you to do this for everything in general as you're trying to learn these different abstractions. One of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was getting started learning programming, and JavaScript specifically, is I had a friend who told me, just try to re-implement the utility functions that you find in _JS, which was the Lodash of the time, which is a utility library. And it just has a bunch of different utilities that were harder to build on your own back in the day because we didn't have the APIs we have today. But still, many of them are still quite relevant. And I never actually did that. I probably should have, though, because it will teach you a lot to try and build your own version of this. And there was another guy named Taro, and I can never say his last name, but he made a build your own AngularJS, and that was a super effective way to learn AngularJS. I'm sure that there are places where they'll teach you how to build your own React, but building your own version of abstractions is a phenomenal way to learn the abstraction. And it's not like you're not going to build the next one and publish it to NPM and have billions of users or whatever. Maybe you will, but you'll learn a ton by building it yourself. So definitely something that is worth your time if you want to really be able to use this abstraction really well. The next question that you'll start asking yourself as you're building out your application is how to do state management. This is a really common question And it's one of the hardest parts of application development, really, is state management, or one of the parts of application development that we make hardest, just by our very nature, I guess. But here are a couple of tips for as you're learning and as you're starting to deal with managing state in your application. The first thing is focus on component state. Use state is really great. And like so many of the use cases for state can just fall into component state and use state. Sometimes you want to reach for use reducer. It's also very good. And these are links to the docs to learn about those. And in the beginner's guide to React, I teach you how to use state. 90% of the time, that'll get you everything that you need for building a basic application. And then when component state isn't enough and you need to start sharing state across sibling components or something, then you can learn how to lift state up. That basically takes your set state function and changes that for an on change from props, and then your value is going to come from props. And if that props thing doesn't make sense to you, you will learn about this later as you're learning about React. And then an important step that people typically skip is co-locating state. And so that's doing the opposite, where you have this state that's up higher in the React component tree. Well, it's only being used by this one component, so let's move it down to that component, and we get rid of a lot of problems in doing that. And this is a link to a blog post where I show you how to do that and explain to you why that's valuable. And then for your server cache, you can use React Query. So a big mistake that people make when they're doing React applications is they consider all stuff that can possibly change in their application as application state. And a huge portion of what people call application state is actually a cache of what the server gives to you. So if you have a contacts list and your user goes to get those contact lists from the server, what you have is not state. What you have is a cache of the state that lives on the server, actually in the database. And so if we just combine it all together, say here's our UI state and our server cache application state in just one thing, then managing state becomes a real big challenge. But if we can separate those two and say, here's my UI state and here's my server cache, and we can just dump that into something as great as React Query, then managing our application state becomes really, really straightforward, a lot more straightforward than just putting it all together and trying to manage it that way. So strong recommendation from me to learn React Query when you get to that point. And then a couple different variants of types of state that I see people over-complexing. If your state doesn't change, so it's like a theme or just some configuration, then you can use just a regular JavaScript module, just a JavaScript variable. You import it into the places where it's needed, and that's a singleton. There's nothing special that you need to do with that. Just put it in a JavaScript module, you import it where it's needed, and now it's actually data, not state in that case. If it's simple state, then that you need to like share across your application, then use context is great. It's a great way to share that state across your application. And it's a really, really long time before you need to start reaching for something like MobX or Redux. So I definitely wouldn't recommend reaching for anything beyond what I've shown you right now before you are having some serious problems with what we have here. People reach for those solutions way too early, and it makes your application a lot more complicated. Okay, so then you want to style it, and I strongly advise Tailwind CSS. It's awesome, really, really cool way to build UIs that are consistent. But every now and then, even with Tailwind and all of its configurability and everything, you're going to have one-off styles. And I can't think of anything better than the CSS prop with emotion. So here, I should probably pull that up. That's emotion.sh. It is really, really awesome. So as you're getting through some of this stuff and dealing with some of these problems, give emotion a strong look. That's how I build applications for years. It's really awesome. And then from there, just learn as you go. So whatever problem you come up against, especially if you're learning right now, it's very likely that's a solved problem or a problem that's being solved by someone else, or maybe it's not, and you can build the solution and help other people solve it. And so there's plenty of opportunity in this community. It's really, really big. Lots of solutions that you can investigate and play around with. But I would recommend putting some of those things off to the side while you focus on making sure you understand the boxes that encapsulate each one of these individual abstractions. You'll use them way more effectively if you understand what the purpose of each one is individually. And with that, that's all that I have to share with you. And I'm totally happy to answer any questions that people have about anything. So fire away. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. Does anybody have any questions? Hopefully we don't get bombarded at once.
Yes, I do have questions. Okay.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm Coriano. So I just had a question around when it comes to use a React router. So they have the and I believe it is called, is it browser router, if I'm correct? And so just trying to get an understanding of when to use that, because from my brief understanding, that is really for history state, if I'm correct. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to get a little more clarification on that, on browser router and how you should be utilizing it.
Yeah. So React Router has support for native and even Node for server rendering and for the browser. And so depending on the environment that you're using, you're going to want to use the router that's supported by that environment. And so yeah, typically for most people listening right now, that's going to be browser router. You'll just use that one. But it's all pretty well documented. So read the docs and follow along with what they're doing. They will probably not lead you astray. And if they do, then it's a great opportunity to contribute back to the docs.
Okay, thank you.
One question that was submitted is, should we learn hooks?
Yes, absolutely learn hooks. I have a strong opinion about this. So currently React has two ways that are kind of the standard ways to create React components. You can create class components, which are legacy, and hooks or function components, and you can use hooks to create stateful and effectful components. Every single day, class components become less relevant. They're still relevant. There are still many class components in the wild, but every few months, I'll ask Twitter in a poll how much of your code base is hooks versus classes, and every single poll, and it's accelerating. The number of people who have no classes in their code base is growing. So everybody's moving to hooks. That's the future of React. They are conceptually simpler and carry fewer bugs with them. You'll have fewer bugs using them. And so what I recommend is go through Beginner's Guide to React, because I only do hooks in there. And then on an as-needed basis, you can go learn about class components. So 100% focus on hooks. You may never need to learn class components.
Okay, another question from Daniel is, what resources do you recommend for learning React Query?
So right now, the docs are all that I can offer. I know that there are a few lessons on Egghead about React Query that you can look up. But actually, React Query is relatively new relative to other solutions like Redux and that kind of things, or Apollo. So there aren't quite as many resources available. But the docs are quite good. So hopefully that's
okay.
helpful.
Another question is, this is from Bhavani. I've directly used Gatsby without learning much of React. Now I struggle every time I try to build something in React. How do I go about reverse learning the abstractions?
I think that going through the Beginner's Guide to React will help a lot. And this is actually something that I find a lot. That people will go 2 or 3 years of using React for their day job. And then they watch the Beginner's Guide to React and their minds are totally blown, because for the first time they're learning the fundamentals of how these things all work together. and then they're suddenly able to be more effective at using these abstractions. So I guess I should give a full disclosure. I make money when you watch this course, and so I'm pushing it because, yeah, I make money, but I literally can think of nothing else on the internet that's better for learning React than the course that I've made. I wouldn't have made it if I thought there was something that, or if I didn't think that I could offer something that could teach people better. So I feel really strongly that you'll learn a lot by going through that course.
Honestly, full disclosure, you watch a YouTube video, it's the same concept. So I don't see a reason without doing that, except you have valuable information that is tried and true to be valuable.
Yeah,
This question is from Rob Martin. Can you give an example of using tailwinds versus emotion?
Yeah, so Tailwind is classes. And so if we go to Tailwind CSS, they've got this cool little demo that plays through. It's just pretty fun. But it's a bunch of utility classes. And emotion CSS property is basically like CSS, except you can write it in your components, like directly on the elements that you're rendering. And so it's not utility classes. Instead, it's like actually writing real CSS just in your JavaScript. So we can go red, and now it's red. And so the CSS prop, and there are a bunch of like, you have the ability to theme things. So you could pull in, a theme for what the background color should be or whatever. And there's a lot of dynamic capabilities that you have when you put your CSS in JavaScript. But for consistency purposes, Tailwind is really good for that. And so that's why I recommend Tailwind, so that you can get a consistent UI, and then you can use the emotion CSS prop for everything else that's that doesn't really fit into the box of whatever it is that you're trying to style. Like, I need an extra padding on the left of this thing, or I don't. This SVG is shaped weird, so I don't have a preset padding utility class for that. So I need to do a one-off sort of thing for that. So.
If you had to choose one of those to learn in preference, which one would you choose?
So I would go with emotion because you just have so much more control, especially. So actually, let me back up. If you know CSS, go with emotion. If you don't know CSS and you just want to get something going, then start with Tailwind. I think that's what I'd suggest. But learn them both.
All right, Firebase or Amplify for beginners?
Ooh, I actually use neither one. I use Netlify, big fan of Netlify. But if I had to choose one of those two, I'd probably go with Firebase, only because I have used Firebase before. I haven't used Amplify before. And from my experience, anytime I've used an Amazon-based product, it's always been really confusing. And Firebase has been pretty straightforward. Another reason is Ryan Florence, who's a good friend of mine, really likes Firebase a lot, and so I trust my friends, and so that's what I'd go with. But I'm a big fan of Netlify. I feel like their developer experience is phenomenal.
And because we're GDG, Firebase is awesome. And our next meetup, is April 23rd, where it's React with Firebase. So I'm gonna throw that out there too if you want to learn some more. Okay, this is from Om Patel. I've seen you tweet that state machines and state charts are the future. Can you explain what those are and how they may relate to React?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a blog post about state machines right here. And I show you how to build a state machine library in JavaScript. So XState is kind of like the de facto, most everybody who's doing state machines is going to be using XState. It's awesome. But I wanted to understand how XState works. And so I built my own very, very miniature, not feature complete version of XState. And so this will teach you a little bit about what that is. It's actually pretty simple relative to what you might expect from a or what you might be thinking a state machine is, because it sounds kind of scary. But basically, a state machine is you can think of a state machine as an object that has different properties, and those properties represent a different state that your application can be in. So you can think of, if we think about what's the word, traffic light. You can be red, yellow, or green, but you can't be red and green at the same time. And so each one of those represents an individual state that your application can be in at any given point in time. And hopefully from there you can go into this blog post and explore things a little bit more. As far as how they apply to React, one of the cool things about React is its state model, that you can put things like inside of this black box that we call a component, and everything lives inside of there, and it's all isolated from the rest of the world. When you put a state machine in there, it makes the state changes that can happen inside of that black box more predictable, especially when we're talking about complex components. Like think of a date picker or something, where you can choose the next month, but you can't choose the next month when you're in the year view or something, like different things like that. State machines allow you to model all the possible transitions from one state to another and be totally bug-free while doing it. So definitely something worthwhile for looking at, and hopefully that answered the question.
Just side note, you want to know how dumb I feel right now? I just kept trying to move your cursor because I was like, why is my mouse on the screen because I'm recording? Anyway, next question, Redux versus Mobex, which one?
If I had to choose one, I'd probably do Mobex. Redux, so I have some thoughts on this, and I get long-winded, so I'll try to keep it brief. But every application that I've seen that uses Redux ends up putting too much state into Redux. And that ends up making it really hard to maintain the application in the long term. I see Mobex as a way to both co-locate your state and make it global, just the way that it works. It also suffers from fewer performance problems that I have seen in Redux applications. But if I were building an application today, what I showed you in these slides is all that I use. I don't need Redux, I don't need Mobex. And in fact, I do have a blog post about this. I have 150 blog posts, so I have a lot of blog posts. But it is one of these ones about state. This one, application state management with React, where I talk about how React is an application state management library. You don't need anything else other than React Query, because that's a server cache management library, which is different.
All right. Is there ever a scenario you'd write a component strictly to make its hooks implementation details more testable? Is it always best practice to only test the UI effects and ignore the implementation details? That's from Ryan Filler.
Yeah, so it is always best practice to only test the UI effects and ignore implementation details. So yes, the answer is yes. Sometimes it's okay to make some changes to your implementation to make it more testable, but when you're doing that, just make sure that you're not changing your code in a way to just to appease the test. Like I've got so many blog posts about this actually. So, but probably the biggest one is testing implementation details. That one's kind of pretty big one. And then, testing in general, I have 32 blog posts that you can go take a look at. This one's also pretty relevant. Avoid the test user. And Ryan just asked a follow-up, but what if your hook implementation is really complicated? So if it's really complicated, that's not really a problem necessarily, because like hopefully it's accomplishing some purpose for the user, and you're going to want to test what the user will be experiencing with your hook. And if you do that, then you'll cover all of the things that you're trying to do with the hook. It doesn't matter how complicated it is, as long as you test all the things that the user can do, then you should be fine. That said, if it's just really difficult to do that for some reason, then you can test the hook directly. And I do have a blog post about that that I wrote just recently about how you can test the customer. In fact, I've got a couple blog posts about that in general. So hopefully that's helpful.
Guys, I think we need to reference his blog for everything React related. So make sure you like favorite that thing. But this is from Igor Ackerman. What is your personal favorite way to learn new technologies? Blog posts? Do you use written tutorials, videos? What technologies outside of React did you have a look at recently?
Yeah, so the way that I learn new things is not the same way that I help other people learn new things, actually. I produce so much more than I consume. I haven't read or worked through a tutorial in a very long time. I have watched a couple Egghead videos to get kind of up to speed on some new topic for me, like Gatsby, for example. That's something that's relatively new. I mean, I guess it's been like a year and a half. But that was one thing that I was like, okay, I've got to go learn how to get up to speed with something like this. But where I learn stuff is in the process of producing content. Actually, a great example of this is state machines. So that this implementing a simple state machine library, I did not know I'd never used XState before when I wrote this blog post. So I wrote this blog post so I could learn how state machines work. That's how I learn stuff, is I produce content on it. And then, before I like sell it or anything, I run it through the ringer to make sure that what I'm going to tell people to do is a good idea. And so I ask people who know. But that's how I learn stuff. I do dive into code implementation a lot in the process of doing that. But yeah, so my big secret is I produce way more than I consume. So yeah.
I almost missed this question here, but it's React testing library versus Enzyme. And that's
Well,
from
so
Karthik.
you're not going to get a unbiased opinion from me because I wrote React testing library. So obviously I'm going to say React testing library. But I don't just say that because I wrote it. I wrote it because it's a really good idea. And the blog post that I referenced earlier about testing implementation details is relevant here. So implementation details. So go ahead and take a look at that. But the basic idea is if you test with Enzyme, then you can't really be certain that your application is going to work because it encourages you to test things in a way that's different from the way that it works in production. And so if you really want to make sure that your application works in production and you want to make sure that your refactorings are going to be covered and like you're not breaking things when you refactor them, then you want to do React testing library. Also, just as a side note, the React team officially endorses using React testing library. So if you want to do what the React team says, then React testing library is your thing.
All right, this is from Ruben Smello. What is that? Which type of apps should we build to solidify our knowledge?
So that's a great question. I strongly recommend building existing applications. So make a clone of Twitter or make a clone of Hacker News or a clone of any app that you think is interesting. And you don't have to build all the features of that app. Just build the parts that you think are interesting. But the reason why I think a clone is the best type of app to build to learn is because then all the decisions are already made, all the product decisions that are irrelevant to your learning of the thing that you're trying to learn. And so, yeah, getting rid of all of those decisions so you can focus on building and learning the thing that you want to learn will just accelerate your learning potential there. And it also gives you a reference implementation for when you get stuck. Like, how did they do this? And then you can maybe it's sometimes a little tricky, but you learn a lot in the process, but you can dive into their implementation and see how they did stuff. So
one thing I would add on to that, and it's just because I know we have many beginners on here or people looking for work. One thing I recommended to everyone that I help find a job is create an e-commerce website. I always recommend something similar to overstock.com because it's multiple products that are going to be on multiple pages and it'll cover multiple search options and you'll have a shopping cart icon. Any company that you're trying to apply to, a lot of hiring managers don't know much about tech. So if you have a hiring manager that you're talking with that doesn't know tech, they know this website. So you're already impressing them with that, and you're impressing them with the shoppability of that website. But if it's a technical aspect, you can say, hey, I'm using this code to create these cards for these products. It gives you a lot to talk about in the interview. You'll definitely stand out, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's been one of the keys for a lot of people. I'm just throwing that out there.
yeah, I like that, Danny. That's a good suggestion.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Little good stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
This is from Kevin B. As a developer, how do you make decisions on finalizing color and theme for your project? Or do you just decide that after getting the code to work?
So for me, I have a designer for everything that I do. I am not a designer. I don't make things look good. In fact, I didn't even build this website. Look at this. Isn't that a cool animation? I really wish that I could tell you that I made that animation, but I did not. So like all of my design stuff is done by somebody else. And that applied when I was doing product stuff too. So I say that not to say go get a designer, because I know that like sometimes you can't do that. But just to say that I'm not, I probably can't answer the question the way that you want me to. So because I'm not a designer, I kind of tend to leave design off to the end, just because it's not the thing that I want to be working on. That's really all I have to say about that. It's not what I'd recommend necessarily. I don't know what to recommend.
So Zam asked this, React moves so fast, an updated course might not work 3 months later. Any tips for us? I would just say he just updated his React beginners course, so you may want to check that out. But anything else from you on Ken?
Yeah. So I would say that the React ecosystem does move fast. That's for sure. And especially like a few years ago, it moved a lot faster than it does today. But React itself does not move very fast. React itself, that course that was just updated is still relevant today. The old version of that course, most of that stuff in there is still totally relevant, especially if you needed to learn class components. It all is still relevant. And that's multiple years old. So I wouldn't be too concerned about things falling out of date in that regard. As far as like things working, so when we're talking about fundamentals like Beginner's Guide to React, that's all fundamentals, just React stuff. We don't bring any additional abstractions. And then yeah, that thing will be relevant for many years, I expect. When we're talking about, okay, let's bring in React Router. Well, React Router has a version 6 alpha that's out right now, and it's going to change not a lot, but a significant portion. And even testingjavascript.com, there are some new features in the testing library suite of tools that should probably be in testingjavascript.com, and I'll update that later. But that's just another example of things that do fall out of date. So React itself, that's pretty stable. The ecosystem, not quite as stable. And what I would say to that is I don't worry about falling behind, because I'm the one who's creating the content. And there's no rule against you being the one to create the content. So you can do the same thing that I'm doing to learn this stuff by diving into the source code and playing around. I've been doing professional software development for, let's see, 6 years. And so it's actually, now it's been a while, but I've been in this position of like staying ahead of the curve for a long time. And I do it by researching the changes that are happening and producing more than I consume, and even while on the job. So and a lot of this, I should preface all of this by saying, like, anytime I say I'm so successful or whatever, I need to say that I am also extremely privileged in many, many ways, that has had a non-trivial impact to the success that I've been able to have. But I do believe that by producing more than you consume, you can learn things really quickly.
So one question I have is, okay, let me ask these, since I just seen a couple pop up real fast. What dependency do you use on every project?
React. That's a cop out, but React Query has become the dependency I use on every project. Emotion is a dependency I use on every project. Reach UI, anytime I need anything that Reach UI currently has, I'm using Reach UI's version of it. So let me show you that here really quick. It is so good, super, super good. So definitely take a look at, like, if you need a menu button or a list box or a combo box or a dialog modal or any of this stuff, Reach UI is the place that I'm going to reach. No pun intended. Actually, the pun was intended. That was absolutely intended.
All right. And Kent, what would bring you the most value that us as your audience could do to help you?
Whew.
I like that one.
That's a good one. Thank you, Elliot. Just the thought makes me feel good. So like a specific project, a specific like coding thing that you could do that, honestly, I've asked, or people have asked me this question, and this is what I tell them, and they kind of get started, and then there's lackluster, they move on to other things, which is why I don't normally bring this up, because you're probably going to be more motivated to do something that's interesting intrinsically to you, not just to help me. But this blog page where I can search through all my blog posts is really awesome. It's like, I love having this, but I have content on many platforms: Egghead, Front-End Masters, YouTube. I've guest posted on blogs. I have podcasts, just content, so many different places. And it'd be really awesome to have it all in one place as a searchable thing. So that would be something I'd love to have, is just one place that aggregates all of the stuff that I've created. So if you want to do a coding project that helps me and in turn helps a lot of people, because then my content will be accessible and searchable, then that would be an awesome project that I'd love for somebody to do one day. But as far as like helping me accomplish my goal is to make the world a better place. And the way that I do that is by teaching people how to build software so that they can in turn use the things that I've taught to make the world a better place. So if you're learning from me and you're doing anything but making the world a better place, then maybe stop doing that. But please, like, take the stuff that I teach and turn around and do something with that to make the world a better place in whatever way that is. If you're building apps and you can build an app that can make the world a better place in one way or another, then that's awesome. That's what I want. That's what I need. Or if you want to be an instructor and I teach you something, turn around and teach that. Put your own spin on it. I actually have a blog post that's relevant to that as well. And that is solidifying what you learn. And here I talk about how, how like you can have a Burger King right next to a McDonald's. Like, why do they do that? Like, they're both burgers. They're basically the same thing, but they do it because like there's a market for it. There's even there are 3 Starbucks on the exact same street corner. I think this is somewhere in Texas or something. In Houston. Like they do that because there's a market for it. Even though it's literally exactly the same thing, they still are doing that because you can reach people that I can't reach. So if that's something that you want to do and get into teaching, then that also makes the world a better place. So yeah, if you want to help me accomplish my goals are to make the world a better place. So do whatever you can to do that. And that's a good help.
So I'm going to ask these last 2 questions, then I'm going to do the giveaways, and then we're done for tonight. So I'm going to ask Wahib's question first because it's relevant to what you just said now. Could you see that as a web scraping project for contents produced by Kent, meaning the blog?
Yeah, so you could definitely do it as a web scraping thing, but there are APIs for pretty much everything. Like there's an API for YouTube, so you could just grab all the stuff from YouTube. For Egghead, that one, actually there is an API for that I can give you, so you can grab that. For Front-End Masters, I don't add new content to Front-End Masters very much, so I just hard code that stuff. So there's not really a whole lot of web scraping that would need to happen. Just use it.
And the last question is, what would you change if you started studying React today?
What would I change about me, like my process
way you started
of studying it?
Yeah.
So I started learning React back in 2015, and I just went through the docs. I remember, if you go back then, I have tweets where I just quote stuff from the docs. I'm like, wow, this is so true. Or like, because the docs were just full of little tidbits of, here's why we did this, because this is going to be better for your application, or whatever. And so, yeah, I just read through the docs and I started tinkering around building things. I built little libraries that I knew nobody would use and I never used. And I built applications like, I think if I were to change what I did, I probably would build a more substantial application. I'd probably build a clone of something else that already exists. Because what I just built like little small things and it never really went to something substantial until I actually got a job doing that. And at the time I was doing AngularJS, so I had plenty of JavaScript and development experience when I got my React job. But yeah, if I were to do it all over again, if I knew nothing about web development and I was learning React right now, I would do exactly what I just said in this talk and learn React that way.